What is a wetland? In some ways, a wetland is easy to define. Its name seems to define itself. A wetland is wet land, a combination of land and water. A place where feet sink into the muddy ground or disappear below the murky surface.
Wetlands are a biome, an area that has a certain kind of climate and certain kinds of living things. There are several major kinds of biomes. For example, grasslands are noted for their different kinds of grasses and a fairly dry climate. Tropical rainforests have a wet climate and extremely lush vegetation. Deserts have little rain at all and relatively little vegetation.
In some ways, wetlands are harder to define than other biomes because they take so many forms. Swamps are wetlands. Some are forests of tall trees whose bases rise out of the flooded forest floor. Salt marshes are wetlands. They exist at the boundary of sea and land, where plants and animals have adjusted to the daily rhythm of rising and falling tides. Freshwater marshes are wetlands. They have soft-stemmed grasses and other plants that can survive partly in and partly out of the water. Bogs are wetlands. They are covered by moss that grows on top of layers of dead plant material called peat.
Some wetlands are huge and stretch to the horizon in all directions. Others can be measured in a few short steps. Wetlands exist throughout the world. There are wetlands in Canada and Alaska near the Arctic Circle, and there are wetlands in tropical rainforests along the equator. Wetlands cover only about 6% of the Earth's land, but their importance is much greater than their size indicates. Wetlands are thriving communities of plants and animals. They are among the best places to observe the different stages of life. Let us look at different kinds of wetlands.
A swamp is a wetland whose plant life is dominated by woody plants like trees and shrubs. Only plants that can withstand having their roots submerged for long periods of time, like these cypress trees, can survive in a swamp. Many of the swamps in Florida and other southern states are cypress swamps. Swamps in other areas have different vegetation. Northern swamps, like the Great Swamp of New Jersey, have plants like red maple, black gum, and ash.
In southwest Florida, students from the Everglades City Middle School explore the Fakahatchee Strand, a cypress swamp. Swamps have distinct layers, each with its own kind of life. Many unusual animals exist in the swamp water. Glass shrimp are so transparent that you can watch their stomachs digest their food. Using small nets, the students easily capture several species of small fish. Under the supervision of naturalist Mike Owens, they put the fish into aquariums.
We actually caught about 8 different species today, ranging from catfish to brim to warmouth to mosquito fish.
After they've had a chance to study the fish, the students release them back into the swamp. Birds, such as this great blue heron, feed on fish and other animals that inhabit the swampy waters. A cottonmouth slides into the water in search of frogs and other prey. The flooded forest floor is also home to turtles and many other animals.
Above the floor of a cypress swamp, epiphytes cling to the trunks and branches of the trees. Epiphytes are plants that grow on another plant, but don't get their nutrients from that plant. Instead, they get their nourishment directly from the air and rain. Among the different types of epiphytes are many kinds of bromeliads, which are related to pineapples, and various kinds of orchids. The highest layer of a swamp is the canopy layer, the tops of the trees themselves. Many kinds of birds, such as herons, nest in the canopy of a swamp.
The Fakahatchee Strand and most other swamps are freshwater swamps. Only a short distance away from the Fakahatchee, along the southwest coast of Florida, there are other kinds of swamps, mangrove swamps. Mangroves grow where few other trees can, in salt water. Mangrove trees have stilt-like roots called prop roots that support the trees against rising and falling ocean tides and waves. The roots also are home to oysters and many other kinds of animals. Mangrove trees form islands that provide a home to birds that nest in their canopy. As the sun sets, the sky fills with different birds returning to these mangrove islands, including pelicans, ibises, and herons. The mangrove islands provide a sanctuary where these birds are safe from most predators as they settle in for the night.
Marshes can form in any shallow depression where the soil becomes saturated or so full of water that it can't hold any more. Any additional water collects on top of this saturated soil. Many marshes look like shallow ponds full of weedy plants. They may, in fact, have started out as ponds, later to become marshes as they filled with decaying vegetation. Marshes also lie along the banks of rivers and lakes.
Marshes are more open, less dark and shady than swamps. While swamps have trees and shrubs, marshes have grasses and grass-like plants. Such plants are called emergents. This means that they grow with their stems and leaves partly submerged. Other plants, called submergents, grow entirely underwater. There are also floating aquatics, plants like water lilies that float on the surface. Water lilies are anchored to the bottom by their roots and have long, flexible stems. Some floating aquatics don't have stems. What looks like green slime coating this alligator in a Florida marsh is actually millions of tiny duckweed plants. Duckweed has roots that hang down and absorb minerals from the marsh water.
Marshes are full of animal life. Raccoons are common visitors to many marshes. In some marshes, you can find beaver dams and lodges made of twigs and branches. The beaver are often busy building and repairing these elaborate structures. The animals that inhabit marshes have special adaptations that help them survive in these environments. Ducks, for example, have webbed feet to help them move through the water. Other birds, such as this ibis, have long legs for wading and long bills for nabbing fish. Anhingas have dagger-like bills for spearing fish. Marshes are important habitats for many different birds. More than half of the geese and ducks and other kinds of waterfowl in North America nest in freshwater marshes. These marshes are nurseries where, for many animals, life begins.
Tidal, or salt marshes, exist in an environment that changes dramatically every day as the ocean's tides come in and go out. Twice a day at low tide, muddy flats are exposed to the air, only to be covered hours later by salt water. The vegetation in a salt marsh has adapted to survive conditions that exist in this transition zone between salt water and dry land. Each day as the tide comes in, the plants in a salt marsh may be covered by salty and often cold water. While at low tide, they are exposed to the dry air, which, depending on the season, may be hot as well. Much of the grass in a salt marsh is spartina or cordgrass. Salt is harmful to plants, but spartina has special glands that excrete or get rid of the salt. If you run your finger over the grass, you can see the salty residue. Another type of grass, Phragmites, is somewhat less tolerant of salt than spartina. It is more likely to grow farther from the water. Shrubs like marsh elder can be found along a salt marsh's shore, where the tides only occasionally reach them.
Salt marshes are more productive than almost any other places on Earth in terms of how much plant matter they grow. A salt marsh, for example, grows more than twice as much plant matter as a cornfield the same size. Salt marshes are so productive because they are full of nutrients brought in both by the ocean tides and by freshwater rivers and streams. Salt marshes are excellent laboratories in which to observe the flow of energy in life. The ultimate source of almost all life's energy is the sun. Plants use the energy of sunlight to produce their own food and grow. This is called photosynthesis. When spartina and other plants in a salt marsh die, they break down or decompose, releasing their nutrients back into the environment where other living things can use them. The mud in the flats exposed at low tide is actually made up of decomposed plant material. Microscopic bacteria play an important role in decomposing dead plants and animals. But other creatures, like these mud snails and clamworms, also act as decomposers by chewing and shredding dead plants and animals into smaller pieces.
All this decayed plant and animal material makes the water in a salt marsh a rich stew for many kinds of animals, like this ribbed mussel, which filters the water for particles of food. When the tide is low, fiddler crabs feed on decaying pieces of grass. Fiddler crabs, mussels, fish, and other small animals are themselves food for larger creatures. Like other wetlands, salt marshes are havens for many kinds of birds. Some animals that spend most of their lives farther out in the ocean breed in salt marshes. The unusual-looking horseshoe crab is one example. Horseshoe crabs are actually not crabs at all, but distant relatives of spiders. At high tide in late spring, a female horseshoe crab lays her eggs, and the smaller male fertilizes them with his sperm. As they mate, some pairs are exposed on the mudflats when the tide recedes, and they risk being attacked and eaten by birds. They slowly crawl into the water, creating a small trench as they bulldoze their way through the mud. Salt marshes are among the richest environments on Earth for life. Here we can see, perhaps more clearly than anywhere else, the universal cycle of birth, growth, death, and decay.
While salt marshes are the most biologically productive kind of wetland, supporting a wide variety of plant and animal life, bogs are the least productive. A bog may have started out as a lake or pond formed from rainwater or melted snow. But the water that collected had no place to go. This stagnant or inactive water has little oxygen and very few nutrients and minerals. One result is that the water doesn't support decomposers like bacteria that are common in other wetlands. Instead of breaking down and releasing their nutrients, dead plants in a bog form mats of undecayed plant material called peat. In some bogs, the peat may be very thick. Sometimes it forms on the surface of water so that walking on a bog is a little like walking on a waterbed. The easiest way to see a bog, in fact, is by walking on the more stable surface of a boardwalk. There are many interesting things to see. Often you will find different kinds of orchids, like this rose pogonia. Mats of sphagnum moss grow on top of the peat. Sphagnum moss contains a great deal of acid, and it makes the water in a bog very acidic. When it dies, this moss becomes the main component of the undecayed peat, so that over time the peat becomes thicker and thicker.
While the water in a bog is low in nutrients and minerals, some plants have adapted to these harsh conditions in a reversal of how things usually occur in nature. In other wetlands, many animals get the nourishment they need by eating plants. In a bog, the tables are sometimes turned. There are carnivorous or meat-eating plants that trap unwary insects and other small animals to obtain some of the nutrients they need. Sundews are a common bog plant. If you look closely at a sundew, you might see an ant caught by the sticky substance secreted by the plant's tiny hairs. Pitcher plants get their name from their leaves, which form a deep pitcher-like shape. Special markings and smells attract insects to their lips. Once they land, however, they slip down the plant's slippery surface into the liquid at the pitcher's base. This liquid contains juices that digest the insects. The pretty yellow bladderwort is another deadly plant for small animals, but the action doesn't take place near the colorful flowers. Below the water surface, the plant has tiny balloon-like bladders. These suck in and digest tiny animals, like red water mites.
You won't find the same variety of animal life in a bog that other wetlands have. Dragonflies and other insects are common. Birds like this snipe and other animals will occasionally visit a bog to feed on plants, but for most animals, bogs are difficult places to live. Yet a bog is still fascinating to explore because of the unusual plant life that exists there.
Wetlands are important to people for many reasons. For one thing, we depend upon them for food. Over half the world's population eats rice, which is grown in wetlands. 2/3 of the fish and shellfish obtained off the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the United States rely on nutrients from salt marshes and mangrove swamps. Decomposed plants and animals in these wetlands are the basis of food chains upon which fish and shellfish, and ultimately humans, depend.
Wetlands provide other benefits. They help prevent flooding. In 1993, many places along the Mississippi River suffered the worst floods in over 100 years as the river overflowed its banks. Billions of dollars worth of damage was done to towns, cities, and farms when the Mississippi broke through levees built to keep the river in check. Wetlands can absorb great quantities of water and help prevent such disasters. After heavy rains or when snow melts in the spring, wetlands along rivers provide a place for the excess water to go rather than rushing all at once downstream. Wetlands also help to clean water. As water flows through a wetland, its plants filter out pollution. Some communities, in fact, use wetlands to treat their sewage.
As we have seen throughout this program, another reason wetlands are important is that they provide habitats for many different kinds of wildlife. Wetlands help protect the Earth's biodiversity, the diversity of all its different plants and animals. In fact, 1/3 of endangered and threatened species, like the bog turtle, live in wetlands. For people, wetlands offer unusual opportunities to observe and appreciate different kinds of plant and animal life. Canoeists, birdwatchers, hikers, fishermen, and hunters all take advantage of wetlands. In spite of such benefits, however, many people still do not recognize the worth of wetlands.
In many cases, the consequences of this ignorance or indifference have been serious. The Everglades in Florida offers one example. The Everglades is the largest freshwater wetland in the United States. It is a biological treasure. Alligators, turtles, snakes, and many kinds of unusual birds make their home here. Parts of the Everglades are marshes and parts are swamps. Some call the Everglades a river of grass because the water in the Everglades is actually a broad, shallow river that flows slowly from Lake Okeechobee.
Starting around 1900, however, state and local governments started building canals so water that normally would have flowed into the Everglades could be diverted for other purposes. Some of it was used for drinking water for a growing population in Miami and other places nearby. Much of it was used for farms, particularly for growing sugarcane. The result was that too little water reached the Everglades, and much of the water that did was polluted from agriculture. One consequence has been that the numbers of many kinds of wading birds and other kinds of wildlife have decreased.
The Everglades is only one of many examples of the human impact on wetlands. Throughout the world, wetlands have been drained and filled to make way for housing and developments. California has destroyed 90% of its wetlands. The draining of marshes worldwide has led to a big decline in the numbers of ducks and other waterfowl that use these marshes to nest and feed. Throughout the world, the numbers of frogs and other amphibians have also declined sharply. One reason why some amphibians are now threatened or endangered is that their wetland habitats have been destroyed.
Fortunately, people have begun to wake up to what we stand to lose if we continue to fill in or pollute our remaining wetlands. What has happened to the Everglades is a warning signal of the damage that can be done. But the Everglades are also a symbol of hope. In the last few years, federal and state governments and local people have worked to save the Everglades and undo some of the damage. Canals that were built to divert water away from the Everglades are being taken apart so that water will flow once again into this wetland refuge.
People worldwide are trying to conserve the marshes that migratory birds depend on for breeding. In many places, people have taken a renewed interest in wetlands. Some are studying the plants and wildlife. Others are researching how wetlands can protect us from floods or clean polluted water.
But even if these other reasons didn't exist, wetlands would be worth saving for the sense of adventure we feel when exploring a swamp, or seeing up close the carnivorous plants of a bog, or observing an alligator swimming slowly through duckweed, or for the feeling of peace that comes from watching the sunset on a marsh filled with birds.